Well, good morning, everyone. Hi, my name is Jenny Whitener, and I'm with Bridge Innovate, and I am thrilled to invite you to today's session, The Power of Customer Experience, a conversation with Chief Commercial Officer David Hauptman. It's going to be a great session today, but I really want to start out by saying hello to you. If those of you are joining us today for the webinar, if you would just please say hello using the chat. So go into the chat, introduce yourself, your name, and maybe your organization. It'd be great for us to start off today's session just by saying hello to you and welcoming all of you here. I'd encourage you as you're posting your name in the chat hello, Kathy, thanks for being here. I just want to also encourage you to have conversation during today's session. Keep the conversation going on your side. We'll be watching it to provoke us with more insight. So please continue to do that. Hi, Bobby. Welcome to the session. Hannah's here. Thanks so much, everyone. So as you're dialing in today, please introduce yourself in the chat. We have Lauren here. Mary's here also. Tish, thanks so much for joining. We're glad that you're here. Russ, wonderful to have you today. So great group coming together for today's session, The Power of Customer Experience. Let's continue on. So continue to introduce yourselves as you join in. Excuse me. You're now part of the Inspire series and our inspirational community. We are so thankful for leaders like Dave who join us on a regular basis to share their leadership insights on innovation, foresight, and change. And it's through their insights that we're all inspired to do greater work every day. So thanks for joining our Inspire series. We have a lot of things going on and we're thankful Dave's with us today. So let's continue on. Today's session, as you know, is about customer experience. And what we're seeing in the literature and the work that we're doing with our clients is that customer experience is now at the center of the competitive arena. In fact, you know that the Design Value Index shows that companies that integrate design thinking and customer experience into their strategy efforts tend to outpace their industry peers by as much as 228%. It's powerful. And we're going to learn more about that today. If you go on, I know that one of our most famous leaders of all time around customer experience and the power of that in their design was Steve Jobs, the former chairman of Apple. And Steve said, you've got to start with the customer experience and work backward toward the technology, not the other way around. So continuing to put this customer perspective right there at the forefront. And going on, you'll see the literature say that companies are all over this. Forbes reporting that today, 89% of companies compete primarily on the customer experience, up from 36% in 2010. Huge jump. This is the arena, and we are thrilled today going on to introduce to you David Hauptman, Chief Commercial Officer at Kenco. David and I had the opportunity to work together on a strategy project for Kenco. When I first met him, actually, when he moved to the Chattanooga area, he's been in Tennessee for a number of years and led many logistics organizations to great success over 20 years in the marketplace, not only with Kenco and that leadership role that he has there, but with Geodis and DHL. A lot of deep experience there. And Dave was a huge advocate through the business strategy process for bringing in customer experience to the center of that. So I was very thankful that today he's joining us to share his insights. So without further ado, let's just jump right in, Dave. So why don't you just start off with telling the audience, from your perspective, what is customer experience?
Yeah, and again, Jenny, thanks for having me. This is it really is a neat topic because most organizations maybe think they intuitively do this, but they're not as deliberate as they should be. So when you ask me, so what is customer experience? Well, the way we define it is it's all interactions between a user and our brand, okay? And the key word is interactions, all right? They don't actually have to use our brand, our service, or a product. It's just to interact with it. So, and it's also, let's not confuse it with customer service, all right? Customer service is simply one element across the whole customer experience. And by the way, you'll refer to me, and I think you had this at the beginning, Jenny, I'll say customer experience. Sometimes you'll hear me say CX. It's the same thing, just short. But again, it's also the way that the customer or particular prospect feels about your brands, and this customers or their feelings are made up by interacting with a number of things that we as organizations put out there, and that's advertising, that's sales, that's the way they specifically interact with your product or your service, the quality of that, the way you deliver your service or product, and of course, customer service. So that's how we define it.
Great. I mean, I've heard organizations talk about it. It's like the end to the end, when there's like a need, right? And then where do I go from there? And how do I get the services that I need? And then what happens after? So when you think about that, keeping that in mind, that customer experience perspective you just shared, why is it so important? Why are so many organizations embracing this? What's going on here?
Yeah. So listen, I think everybody knows the obvious answer to that question. The obvious answer is, by and large, it's important because if you have happy customers and you can document that, you retain happy customers, and that's obviously a primary objective. So, but also in addition to that, of course, those happy customers give your organization the opportunity to either upsell in things that you do or potentially cross-sell. It's interesting. You were mentioning some stats up front, and I was reading something just in the last month or so, but it was out of the Harvard Business Review, and they said customers that have the best experience with brands spend 140% more than customers who had poor experiences. And I get that's kind of yeah, that makes sense. But oftentimes a customer's experience, if it's poor, they'll continue to use the service or brand in some cases and just not do more. But obviously, what is important is that it's part of the entire organization, not just the ones who are typically customer facing. When I say customer facing, I mean, we all think typically sales, operations, account management, customer service. So it needs to be important to all parts of the organization, not those front lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a really great point. So it's this holistic, focused perspective, but why? Why should the other parts of the organization care?
Yeah, well, really, Jenny, if the organization is not aligned, and I mean the entire organization, or they don't understand the customer experience, you're really missing a large opportunity. And think about it this way. Think about it. If IT or legal or HR or some other support department is not aligned or does not understand the customer experience, most of the time they'll think inward, okay? Meaning that they'll think about what's best for my department from a budget perspective, from a time perspective, from a resource perspective. And everybody knows as well as I do, oftentimes that's not in harmony with the ideal customer experience, okay? So I want you to also, so there's that aspect of it. Think about it another way as well. Think about when products or services that oftentimes IT has a good hand in, product management, other parts of the organization that they either produce or procure. Again, products or services that they produce or procure. If they're unaware or if they're misaligned with the customer experience, it may miss entirely or have large gaps in servicing your customers. So bottom line, it's important to ensure all departments understand it, your customers' needs and wants, and focus on them, not just your organization's internal preferences. But again, it's also important, Jenny, to keep them engaged. So let's get aligned. Let's make sure they understand it, but keep them engaged in this customer experience, because I'm going to make a fairly simple statement, but an unengaged employee creates unengaged customers. All right. So set clear business goals, provide a motivating environment to make this happen. Acknowledge the employees in their journey here with the customer experience, reward them for the right behavior and outcomes, and celebrate success with them. Okay, those are very practical ways on why they should care about the customer experience. And so, and quite frankly, it starts, Jenny, it starts at the top.
Very, very good point about getting everyone aligned and how it starts at the top, Dave. I mean, you think about that. I think, like you said, many people historically had thought that customer experience is something that the marketing department took focus of, but it does start at the top. And so, how do you do that? How do you engage the senior executives with the focus in this arena around the end to end and around making investments around customer experience?
Yeah, Jenny, I've had multiple times direct experience with this, and that's such a good question, because the majority of executives, you ask anyone, they'll tell you they believe customer loyalty is a key success factor. But the issue has typically been putting that belief into action. I was trained in Miller Heiman too many years ago, but it's still very applicable today. And they did some really good work on this.
Tell us how many years. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. They noted that organizations that excel in this, or are leader organizations, had three primary characteristics. Okay, they had the budgeted money in allocated CX, or customer experience resources. Those customer experience resources were cross-functional. That's number two. And number three, they had a CX owner at the executive level. Okay, so Jenny, I'd be interesting to poll the group here if we could get that set up, because I do want to get into a little bit more. You asked the buy-in, but I'm very curious to see from a group perspective. We've got a bunch of folks on the line. I'd love to see, to poll the audience, who owns it in the organization today? Who owns it in their organization? And by the way, an answer can be nobody, because oftentimes nobody is the answer. But I'd love to see. I'm going to kind of look at the chat as we do this, but
yeah,
would love to get some feedback from the group on this.
All right, so audience, time to hear from you. Who owns customer experience in your organization? Okay, so everyone, that's great. That's a perfect answer, right? Everybody owns it. Okay, so I've seen Jessica weigh in as well with Bobby and Natalie. So that's great. So there's a complete alignment coming in from a couple of people on the slides. Others, what are others seeing in their organization? Who owns customer experience?
I see everybody should. I mean, is that so?
Yeah, Lauren said it has to be part of the culture. Couldn't agree more, huh?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great comments. Continue to share. This is great. Now, but Jenny, I want to add to that. Let's move on. Your specific question on, well, hey, how do you get them to buy in? How do you get execs to start? So again, I'll reference the same Miller Heiman before, because I found their findings around CX to be pretty spot on. And again, first, you'll hear from everyone that they understand, they believe in customer experience. You'll hear that, okay? And a lot of folks will provide a list of all the things they're doing to prove it, all right? But I would encourage this group and everyone to challenge the organization, because the hard truth is that most of the time, the things that you're doing from a customer experience perspective are not unique, okay? They're not unique. So I'm going to give you something. I'm going to give you 5 things here, 5 things that can separate you from the competition, from how to really set this up and start it, okay? So first, one of the things in terms of executives, understand how the customer experience, understand how your customer experience links to business outcomes, okay? This might be the most important, because without understanding how CX benefits the organizations, your senior executives will begin to prioritize other initiatives. You know how most senior executives work. They're looking at the bottom line. They're looking at ROI. They're looking at how the direct impact is, okay? So you must present a business case for your CX using hard numbers. And that ROI can be that can be absolutely seen throughout the life cycle, but focus on ones that are easier to demonstrate, like what a better customer experience can do to increase revenues, what a better customer experience can do to increase productivity or cost savings, or those types of things, okay? There are other areas like ease of doing business, better, flexibility, all those things, but those can be harder to quantify in the short term. So stick to some short-term easy ones. And then as you progress in your journey, those longer term ones can be easier to quantify. Okay, so that's number one. Number two on the list, define and communicate the vision for your desired customer experience. Okay, define and communicate that vision. Don't just fix the broken stuff. All right, people want to gravitate to the broken stuff, but define the whole experience that you want your customer to have. Okay, and the best way to do this is to create a customer journey map. What is a customer journey map? As you can imagine, it is documentation within a specific customer experience on how they feel about their engagement with you. Jenny, you mentioned at the top, a lot of people, this can be complete end-to-end, which at some point I do recommend you do end-to-end, but it can also focus on a key component. You mentioned marketers. For example, many marketers focus on that buyer's journey aspect of the whole customer experience. They focus a little bit on the beginning from lead to revenue. Okay, I'm not saying they shouldn't focus on more, but you hear a lot of that. All right. So that's number two. Number three, I'll be brief. Ensure that customer experience matches your brand promise. Okay, do what you'll say you will do. I know, sounds very, very simple, but ensure you've defined that experience, communicate it to your customers, and measure it, and then hold yourself accountable. Okay. Fourth one, I see there's some questions coming up. I'm going to answer those questions here in a minute, but just to keep going on these five. Fourth, use voice of the customer programs. Okay, use them to effectively manage how your customer experience is being delivered. All right. If you're not using it today, I'd highly recommend it to use it. We use it in a couple different ways. All right. We use it in the we use it at the end of a sales process. All right. So we will, win or lose, we will capture the voice of the customer on how we did. But we also use it biannually to measure our customer experience. So when you set this up, make sure you're capturing the right data. And I know this is a little bit self-explanatory, but ensure it's outward facing, not inward facing. Okay. Ask the customer, ask them what they care about, not necessarily what we may have been contemplating, looking inward. All right. Last, the fifth, use VOC to drive customer improvement. Again, this is a little bit of my duh statement. Okay. But oftentimes we don't use that, close that loop. All right. We get feedback, but we don't acknowledge it. I'll just say this, in a prior role that I had, Jenny, into the team out there, we struggle a little bit with getting our own customers to provide voice of the customer. Why? I think it's because we heard their feedback, but we didn't have a strong enough process to follow up on that feedback. So oftentimes they'll be disengaged. They'll say, well, why waste my time if I'm not going to get feedback? So, and that's not even the worst part. The worst part is we could lose a customer. Okay, that's the worst part. So
there are a couple questions coming in. I want to kind of take them in a little bit different order than they appear. But the first one around, could you just define a little bit the voice of the customer? And then let's ask our audience, how many of them are using right now VOC, or voice of the customer? So from your perspective, define voice of the customer. Let's poll them. And then I want to go back to some of the other questions coming in the chat.
Yes. So what is the voice of the customer? And if I may blend, because I also see Net Promoter Score is also part of that. We blend the two of those. Okay. So let me first talk about Net Promoter Score, and I'll get into VOC. Net Promoter Score is just, I'll loosely define this. Jenny, you can also offer your insights, but it's the likelihood that your customer would promote you. There's really three areas. There's a detractor, meaning your customer would actually say negative things and dissuade others from using. There's neutral. That's kind of a meh. If you just, yeah, they're fine. I don't know, they're fine. And then there's a promoter who would say, yes, we would actively encourage you to use this company's products or services. Okay, that's a very formal process. Now we add to that. So when we say, so the question is, what's voice of the customer? Voice of the customer is just truly getting an impartial person to interview the customer on, again, how we're doing. What's the customer experience? How are we? And so it's really tailored to your own organization in how you what your products and services offer. Okay, so I would encourage you to keep it somewhat brief.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you don't want to keep the customer on forever, but have very powerful, hard-hitting questions that can be quantifiable. All right.
Okay.
The last thing I'll say is have a neutral party do this, meaning if you are doing this voice of customers for your operations or your service, if you're B2B or sales, don't have the salesperson do it, don't have the operator do it, don't have the client owner do it. Sometimes they feel a little bit bad giving constructive criticism. Mm-hmm. Have a neutral party do this.
That's a good point. So it could be a neutral party inside the organization or an outside firm, but just someone who's neutral. Let's just take a quick poll. And Luke, if you'll help me with putting a question into the chat. How many of you are using voice of the customer? You're actually active with that right now. So you just go yes, no, yes, no. Just give me some feedback of what you're doing in your own organization and whether or not you're engaging voice of the customer. Okay, so I see a lot of yeses coming in. So it seems like people are pretty on board with this, Dave. So one of the tools for really, once you get that VOC active, you have the strategic perspective around customer experience. One of the tools to help navigate this is the customer journey map. And a question came in earlier around that. So I want to ask you about the customer journey map, and can you give some practical advice on that? And also talk a little bit about who owns it. That question came in earlier. So talk about the customer journey map, give some practical advice about engaging with that, and then who owns it.
That's okay. Great. Now remember, what is that customer journey map? That is a documentation of the beginning. So when your customer first experiences, how they feel about it till the end. Okay. So just as a reminder. Now, how I always start with the objective for this map. Is it to improve the overall customer experience if you don't have one? Is it to improve one aspect within? And is it only for one persona? All right. So set that objective up front, and you can always change it as you discover more working through it. Okay. Next is a very practical matter when creating the customer journey map based on, let me get very practical here. Start with a customer journey map on how you perceive it to be today. Okay, that's my recommendation. That's very easy for me to do. So map it out with key components within your organization. So you talk about who owns it. I suggest you have an overall owner. I suggest it be at the top, but there are many aspects of the organization that will touch that. As I said, marketing, sales, operation, product development, all those folks. Get those folks together, create an owner who would say, this is what we think that customer experience is. That gives you a base to work off of, all right? But then you move to these VOCs, these voice of the customers, begin to interview them, begin to understand this, ask questions around that. So what you're doing is you're not creating it from scratch as these customers give feedback, but you are altering it based on what you thought the customer experience was. And I really like to do that because the second aspect of that is think of the power that can create when you bring that back to the organization to say, hey, we think our customer experience was this, but it really is this after talking to all these customers, okay? And that can be very eye-opening and can help when looking for, say, executive commitment. Now, after that, there's personas, okay? If you don't know what a persona is or aren't familiar, personas are fictitious customers or prospective customers with all their demographics and all their psychographics who represent your average customer. Let me give you an example. If you're a B2B, that could be a decision maker. That's a persona. That could be an influencer. That's a persona. Procurement, user, etc. For B2C, that could be females, males, mothers, fathers, age brackets, all of them. All of them are unique in their needs, in their feelings on your product. So understand that, document it. All right. So I'll end with this. I could go really deep here and I won't, but get the qualitative data with that, get the quantitative data for that, okay? Understand that, but once you're done understanding all of that from a persona perspective, and I have a lot more I could go, I'd encourage you to go online and look through that, but move on to the resources that will require to make these necessary changes, okay? But I hope that gives you a quick outline, Jenny, for those in terms of customer journey map.
It does. And Dave, our experience has been the same, that once you actually go through the rigor of documenting those actions of the customer and mapping those emotions, it gives real clarity as to how you're performing in those areas and even identifies opportunities for innovation. So once you've done this customer journey mapping, what do you need to do to get the organization bought in to help execute it?
Yeah, great question. So first, what I would do, communicate and engage the organization with the customer experience you desire. Okay, that map that you desire, communicate that. And once that's been thoroughly communicated and understood, you need to both hire and develop the right talent to execute it. Okay, you do. And as part of developing that, first I'd say training. And I get, excuse me, that's cliche, but it's true. Especially training for those that are customer facing, and more customer facing than not. It's important for customer facing and non, but how many times in your career, how many times have we all experienced this where, we've been, or someone's been the primary customer facing employee, but we've avoided putting certain people in front of the customers because whatever reason, they don't show well, they don't know, they don't. And so we're stuck a little bit because that's our only option. So train them. I don't care how high in the organization, in both hard and soft skills that support the desired customer experience map, okay? Coach, measure, and reward it. But also, if you don't follow up on this, especially early on, as you're getting this customer experience, new customer experience throughout the organization, they will revert to previous habits. Mm-hmm. So reward them quantitatively and qualitatively to support good behaviors and outcomes. All right. Technology is another thing that can help you with this and can provide a tailwind. A CRM can help capture a lot of this. A Salesforce type tool can help capture a lot of this information for you from a quantitative data perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that you talk about the fact that you have to stay focused on it, or oftentimes all the efforts that you've put into mapping, creating the vision, mapping the customer experience, then working the organizational processes to deliver on that vision of the customer experience. If you don't stay focused on it and keep the pressure on, it just snaps back. I think that really calls to your point about the executive leadership owning it. It really has to be a part of that culture. One of our participants today said it has to be the fabric of your organization, that you're going to go end to end. We're not going to just go after spot solutions to engage with customers. We're really going to manage the whole experience. So I love the insights that you've shared with us today. I wish we had another half an hour. What I would just say is that we see this as a dominant issue for all of our clients, and we love doing work in this area. I just would invite our listeners today, if you know of other great speakers on customer experience, let us know, because seeing the reaction, Dave, that you've had today and all the insights that you shared, I think the market is hungry. They're hungry for leaderships to share their insights about how to do this and how to do it well. So any closing comments from you? You've been in this arena for some time now. Give us some closing guidance.
You can't fake it. You can't fake it. It's tempting to look for the one silver bullet for customer experience, but in order to be truly successful, the entire org needs to be engaged with the right people, right processes and systems. A lot of people had great thinking on this, great comments. It starts at the leadership from the top. Execs must walk the talk. And we need tangible commitments and the appropriate resources and funding. So use the customer journey map. That can be the catalyst for change. All right, I'll leave you with that. Start there. That can be your catalyst.
Great. Well, thank you for your leadership in this industry. Thanks for you giving of your time today and your insight. Hats off to you and Kenco for being a leader out there, using the customer perspective to drive strategy and innovation. We thank you. And we look forward to hearing all of the great success that'll come from your leadership effort. So we have more coming up on the Inspire series, coming up, an engineering culture that works on August the 18th. We have a sneak peek. If you're dying to get away from your home office, come join us on August the 27th for our co-working at the Bridge Studio. And then on September 10th, Leading Through Complexity, the Marine Corps Way. Very provocative, engaging conversation there. And biomimicry, if you haven't heard of it, you've got to be with us on September the 15th. Lots more coming up on our Inspire series. We hope to see you soon. Thanks, Dave. Have a great day. Thanks, everybody.